It's working. Thank you. Wow. Light. Dear guests, dear participants, thank you very much for joining us today for our workshop, in which we will talk about the role of the journalist in media education. This workshop is organized in partnership with the Higher Board for Media Education in Belgium and with the International Association for Media Education, IAME, which is a international community of practice for media education all over the world. I am Nicoleta FOTIADE. I'm a media literacy educator and president of Mediawise Society, which is a teaching and training center in media literacy education in Bucharest, Romania. And today I have the honor to be your moderator for the next hour or so. A little bit about myself. I have been serving the media literacy and educational community for almost 20 years now in various roles as expert and trainer, media researcher and advocate. I'm very passionate about empowering educators, librarians, young people and children in order to develop a critical understanding of media, of how media work and their impact on our everyday life. I truly believe that media literacy, which in my opinion includes digital literacy, should be present in formal education from very early ages as life competence and cultural competence, if you like. I'm also very much interested in collective learning and communities of practice. That's why I'm also a member of the IAME board, which is why I'm here today with you as well. Today's topic, the role of journalists in media education, has become ever more central of the idea of media critical learning, now that disinformation is of concern for many voices in the public sphere, especially for the institutional ones. We are all aware that citizens' relationship with information media and journalists has changed radically since the emergence of internet and especially social media, and also with the fact that in many parts of the world, journalists have to deal with many challenges, like that range from self-censorship, economic limitation, to sometimes outright violence against them. And their role as gatekeepers of information seems to have diminished, as well as the trust in them. So in this very particular context, which is not a friendly one sometimes for journalists, today we will try to understand together with my guests how can media education help and how can journalists play a role in media education. How is this changing the relationship between journalists and citizens? What would be the limits and markers to promote in this relationship between journalists and media educators? And of course, we are very much interested to discuss a little bit about the level of trust in journalism and journalists, and how is this affecting or could affect the collaboration. Just two more words about the topic. 2 years ago, I moderated a very lively and interesting conversation about this topic, this very topic, with Professor David Buckingham. Maybe you know him. He's a leading figure in the British and international media education field, and Romanian TV journalist Tudor Mușat. Some other personalities joined the debates, like Professor René Hobbs, but 1 hour debate was not enough to cover for all the facets of this topic. So a lot of open issues remained to be discussed. So I'm very glad that today we have this opportunity. And we will discuss this further with my guest today. And I would like to make a bit of short presentation for each and one of you. Mrs. Juliane VON REPPERT-BISMARCK is the founder and executive director of Lie Detectors, an award-winning and journalist-led news literacy organization raising awareness of disinformation and media bias among school children and teachers. On behalf of Lie Detectors, Juliane advises national and international institutions on anti-radicalization and literacy, including within the European Commission's high-level expert group on digital disinformation and fake news. A very widely used term, fake news, since 2016. For Lie Detectors, she gave up an award-winning international journalism career, during which she wrote for the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, and Reuters, among others. Welcome, Juliana, to our discussion today. You can use your...
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Gilles MILLECAN. Gilles had no choice but to be involved in journalism somehow, as he was born into a family for whom journalism and all what it brings in terms of openness and understanding about the world is very important. But then he studied law. After working as a lawyer, and then as a jurist in a CPAC, Centre Public d'Action Sociale, he returned to his first love and joined the editorial staff at La Libre. After a short passage at Le Soir, he spent a year writing a novel, which is still waiting for a publisher.
Still waiting.
Seduced by the job that combines his two passions, Gilles is now a lawyer with AGP, l'Association des Journalistes Professionnels. He is in charge of supporting members in solving any legal issues they may have. He is also co-responsible for the Journalist in the Classroom program, a role we are very much interested today for our panel. And finally, Patrick Verniers, Director of the Higher Council for Media Education here in Brussels. His professional experience led him to teach about media at the first master's degree in media education here in Ajax, which he created and coordinated for 7 years in partnership with the University of Louvain. Patrick is author and co-author of many media education resources. He has experience in training adults and teachers and youth workers. And during 15 years, he was also director of Media Animation, a media education resource center here in Brussels. He was also a guest lecturer at University de Louvain and member of the European Commission Media Education Expert Group since 2008. He is also a board member with the International Association of Media Education. So, very high-profile guest today. That I have the honor to interview a little bit about the role of journalists in media education. If you don't mind, just a quick survey here in the public. How many journalists with us today? Okay. How many media educators? Okay, thank you. And of the journalists, are you involved in media education actions, media literacy actions? 1, 2? Okay, thank you very much. I suppose the rest of you are mostly students, if I don't. Okay, thank you for your participation. We will hopefully have time to take your questions and comments a bit later. But right now, I would like to start with Juliana. And please tell us a little about your experience in working with journalists, because Lie Detector is a huge organization involving tens or hundreds of journalists in media literacy action. So I'm very much interested, how did you decide to set up Lie Detectors? What was your motivation? When did it start? And how you work with the journalists and in the classrooms?
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for being here and thank you for hosting this panel, which treats an issue that I think we all find so important, which is what to do about the erosion of trust in media and the prevalence of disinformation in our online information spaces. So Nicoleta asked me a very good question. Why did I do lie detectors? Well, I never intended to found lie detectors. I was a very happy journalist for 20 years, and I never intended to stop being a journalist. But in approximately 2016, it became very clear to me that there was an urgent need to act, to help people, and for us specifically, young people, have basic news gathering skills. It became really clear that children are on their own online when they navigate the information spaces that they tell us about, and they do not say, I watch the Journal Télévisé, and they do not say, I watch BBC Newsnight. They say, when I look for news, I go to TikTok. We all know that. I go to WhatsApp, okay. But they also increasingly say, I go to Twitch, which is an online streaming platform, as you probably know, and gaming platforms, Reblox, Fortnite, Discord. And these are places where they are really by themselves. There's no parent, there's no teacher, there's certainly no content moderator or fact checker there to help them. And it is for that reason that 6 years ago, we created a format whereby journalists would learn how to speak with young people about this topic and pass on very simple, basic news judgment skills and fact-checking skills to children and to their teachers. And not just when they go to university, like all of you, and many of you have either been probably or currently are, but from a very young age. So today we're doing this at scale, as you said. We started very small. It was just me to begin with. But it really sort of took off. In the last 6 years, we have now grown to be working with more than 250 journalists from all variety of news media. We work with some fact checkers as well. We work in 5 different countries at the moment, although we're now reaching far further than that with our digital format and are expanding to Central and Eastern Europe, which I think is a region that is hugely overlooked, especially here in the Brussels bubble, and where urgent action is needed. We are walking into more than 1,300 classrooms per year, so we're really doing this at scale at the moment. And what we do really is we select and train journalists on how to speak with children, because you can get it quite wrong, and there are some risks involved. We then have classroom sessions with children. We increasingly train teachers because they ask us to, and we work with academia to evaluate what we have done. How good is it? What is the impact? What do we need to do? What do we, because as there are more and more people, and as this becomes mainstream, and we hope it will become as mainstream a skill as reading and writing, we have to make sure that the quality of our work is top-notch, and the quality of everybody else's work who's doing such important work in this field is top-notch as well. And there we now see some really wonderful advancements. First of all, we're all sitting here today and talking about this. And second, the OECD is increasingly talking about journalistic skills as being a core requirement for children from a very early age, and the European Commission, as you yourself mentioned yourself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliana. Evaluation is a very, very important dimension of media education, and unfortunately it happens very rarely. Hopefully those who are investing in media education will focus on that as well the year. So I'm very happy to hear that you already do this with your program. What's the age of the children involved in your program?
So mainly they are 10 to 15 years old, and the reason is that we see that from age 10, they have a sophisticated enough grasp already of online media, of course, but they start to consume news rather than just
that was the reason
10 to 15.
You set the 10.
Yes, and after 15, they start to get really busy with exams, and we don't want to get involved.
Okay.
Until it's in the curriculum, then I think we can go to other age groups.
Okay, and yeah, that would be a good thing to have in the curriculum inserted, because it would make our work much easier. Sorry. Are you planning visit in the newsrooms as well, or is it visits in the newsroom, or is it only visit of the journalist in the classroom?
Oh, that's a very good question. And so we train all sorts of journalists who are then very welcome to do, to talk more about their own work and to invite the children into the newsroom. But we really want to reach those classrooms that would never normally talk about this. We want to go into the classroom where the teacher really only invites us in because they want a 90-minute coffee break, because there are an awful lot of after-school journalism clubs. There's a lot of that stuff, but the kids who would go and play football instead of going and doing an afternoon journalism club, they're the ones we really need to reach. So we go into classrooms, we go into very small settings. We don't do big events with hundreds of children. It's never more than 30 children, so that in the classroom of the teacher, so that the teacher can start to imagine talking about this themselves, because that's what we want. We want the teacher eventually to feel empowered and do it themselves.
So at this point, the role of the teacher is not very important. The teacher is more of an observer of the classroom?
Oh, okay, so we train the journalists to be able to do it, even if the teacher knows nothing.
Okay.
But of course, if a teacher knows more, the sessions are always better, because the teacher kind of co-moderates them and asks amplifying questions, and is also then interested in taking it forward and continuing the conversation after we've left.
Right. You said, you mentioned earlier that the journalists can get it quite wrong. What did you mean by that? We need to train the journalists because sometimes they can get it quite wrong in terms of the discussion with the children.
So there's two things there. First of all, it could be a waste of time. And second of all, it could do damage. It could be a waste of time if a journalist walks in and goes, "Hey, I'm a football reporter. Let me tell you about the last football match." It's wonderful because the kids love it, but they haven't actually learned anything about, telling right from wrong online, right? So we don't want to be wasting time. That is precious time in the classroom. And the other thing is that we have to be absolutely sure that the journalists hit certain notes. They have to not only talk about what's terrible online, because the last thing, is that we want to scare people away, right? Yeah. What you want to do is you want to say, here's what can be wrong, here's why it matters, and here's what you can do about it. And then the other part, and this is why we work with journalists and not with coaches, is that we really want the journalists to take the time to give a very honest assessment of how journalism works and how journalism sometimes doesn't work and how journalism gets it wrong and how mistakes can happen in journalism.
Right.
And because that way the children actually fundamentally understand that there is a difference between disinformation, manipulation, polarizing content that's been put online on purpose, and journalism which might not always get it right, but actually has the goal of informing the public.
Right. Gilles, I will come back to you, but Juliana said something very interesting, and it just reminded me of something that Renée Hobbs said in the discussion I was mentioning 2 years ago. She said, "News literacy is a marketing effort that idealizes journalism in ways that distort the paradoxes and challenges of the profession. When journalists come into the classroom, there is an opportunity to answer students' questions, but there is a complex power dynamic that inevitably positions the journalist as the expert." Is it the case with your program?
Yes, of course. I'm sure that some of the children are slightly in awe. Many of them have never seen a journalist before in their life. But we actually explicitly train the journalists, and in order to participate in our project, they have to be willing to take time in that 90-minute session to proactively talk about a time when they got it wrong.
Right, good. Maybe we will have a bit of time later to ask you about the training with the journalist Gilles. We are very much interested in what the Journalistes Professionnels are doing. Is it the same thing with lie detectors? Is it different?
Alors, c'est à la fois la même chose et différent, c'est-à-dire que c'est la même chose, on envoie des journalistes dans les classes, on en envoie 450 par an, ça concerne donc 10 000 élèves, enfin, 10 000 élèves. Du fondamental, c'est à peu près les mêmes âges, à partir de 10 ans jusqu'à 15. Voilà, ce qui est différent, c'est que Lie Detectors, pour lequel j'ai travaillé quand j'étais journaliste, que Juliane m'a entraîné à faire cette session de Lie Detectors, c'est que on n'est pas centré sur un seul point du journalisme. Donc dans le mécanisme journaliste en classe, qui est le nom de notre opération, les enseignants contactent notre secrétariat expliquent d'où ils sont, ce qu'ils voudraient comme type de journaliste, voilà, presse écrite, médias audiovisuels, pure player. Et donc on cherche un ou une journaliste qui est de la région de l'école et qui a les compétences demandées par l'enseignant ou l'enseignante. Ensuite, on les met en contact.
Can I ask you,
You can ask everything you want.
Thank you. So it's the teacher who come to you to ask for journalists in the classroom. Are they media educators or teachers of any subject, teaching any subject?
Alors, les deux. Mais donc, initialement, chaque année, on écrit à toutes les écoles en écrivant, voilà, on a cette offre journaliste en classe, participez si vous le souhaitez sur un simple mail ou un simple appel, on traitera votre demande. Ce qu'on fait. Et donc, ensuite, on met en contact l'enseignant et le journaliste. Et là, ils discutent de ce dont ils vont parler. Ça peut être une présentation du métier en général, ça peut être une discussion à propos des fake news, c'est aussi souvent demandé. Ça peut aussi être l'aide à la réalisation d'un média scolaire. Voilà. Ou alors une discussion à propos d'un point d'actualité plus précis. On peut imaginer que cette année, il y a des demandes à propos de la guerre en Ukraine, etc. Comment vous le traitez, d'où viennent les informations. Et donc tout ça est préparé avec l'enseignant en amont. Et après, voilà, le contact avec les étudiants fait qu'il y a souvent beaucoup de questions. Et là aussi, c'est souvent, comme disait Juliana, c'est souvent la première fois qu'ils voient un ou une journaliste. Et donc ils ont plein de questions. Comme vous disiez, Nicoleta, que j'étais co-organisateur, ma collègue est ici dans la salle et en fait elle m'a expliqué que la question la plus souvent posée est vous gagnez combien? Et pourquoi je répète ceci? Parce qu'en fait c'est quelque chose de très important, parce qu'en fait quand ils comprennent ce que gagne réellement un ou une journaliste, ça les sort de la catégorie ils font partie du monde des puissants. Et voilà, ils imposent au monde leur vision du monde. Quand on leur explique ce qu'on gagne, en fait, on ressemble tout de suite beaucoup plus à leurs parents. Et donc, on est quelqu'un de normal et quelqu'un qui entre dans leur vie et qui, effectivement, tu disais que c'était quasiment impossible de sortir du rôle d'expert. Et c'est vrai. Je veux dire, une fois qu'on est l'invité dans un panel, c'est comme ici. Je veux dire, voilà, on est 4 sur scène, c'est nous les experts. A priori. Après, on verra les questions.
Yeah.
Est-ce que ça répond à ta question
Yes, and I have also follow-up questions. I don't like hearing myself. So it's different in the sense that you don't train the journalists to become sort of educators for the children. It's the teacher that sort of moderates the whole experience. The journalist comes as an expert to talk about his work so that the children understand more about the media production context in which messages, articles and other sort of information materials are produced.
Alors, ça dépend des professeurs, et ça dépend un peu moins des journalistes, mais ça dépend ce que le professeur entend mettre en place avec sa classe. Parfois, ils ont préparé ça. Parfois, moi, j'ai déjà eu l'occasion, y compris avec Lie Detectors, où le professeur disparaît, il sort de la classe et il laisse gérer la classe. Tout arrive, en fait.
Oui, bien sûr. Have you done any evaluation of the learning results so far, like in the case of Lie Detectors?
Alors, on fait ça dans chacune des expériences, en fait, finit par un rapport qui est envoyé.
I would be happy to read it. For us in Romania, we don't. Our journalist association is not really involved in media literacy education, unfortunately. We work with journalists if we know journalists. So if they are with, for me, it's easier because I used to work in a media watchdog for 11 years. So I know a lot of journalists, but for our media educators, it's difficult. So Mediawise Society is sort of taking the role of a mediator in between journalists and teachers who wants to have journalists in the classroom. But it happens to a very small scale, so I'm a bit envious with your programs. Thank you. Patrick? Patrick.
It's me.
I will just ask you straight away, can journalists teach media education, or is this the privilege of media educators?
Wow, what a question. As I was involved in this institution, we decided in this institution, beside the journalist master degree, to create a specific media education master degree. And it's actually the only one in Belgium that is launching this kind. So it's a kind of response. I mean, of course, media education is not the purpose of one single journalist arriving during 90 minutes or 2 hours in a classroom. He cannot do the job alone and on a single time. That stated that media education, and especially regarding the relationship between the young people and the information, is a question of lifelong, systematic, and it takes time. And it needs teachers to be involved, and it needs professionals that are coming into the process. So my point of view, and the point of view also of Higher Board for Media Education, which is the public authority of media education, is to embed professional into a media education process. And like Gilles is stating, so you know that Journalistes en classe is a program that exists since now 20 years ago, more or less, France, 20 ans, yes. And it's a completely public finance project. Because we need that also for the school system to have an offer that can... It's underfunded, yeah. We can discuss this, of course. There is not enough money, but there is some money. And what I wanted to say is that it is very useful for teachers that want to start something to have the possibility to invite a journalist and to start a process. It is important for a teacher or a media educator that launch a project to have the possibility to let a journalist intervene into the process. So that's a bit what was telling us Gilles. I mean, it depends really the situation. Sometimes you have to face, to be alone with the children or the purpose, and the teacher disappears. Sometimes the teacher is really involved, and I see it's probably the same case for Lie Detector, and I think the two testimonials here shows that there is not a single model to be involved. Nevertheless, it stays a problem, a long-time problem in the media education world. I mean, some media educators say journalists are not people that are educators, basically. They are mostly journalists. So there is for them, there is a confusion when a journalism come and teach, which is not his profession. So that's a huge debate. But I mean, when you observe all around Europe and internationally, actually, most of the time, journalists and professional journalists especially are involved in a way in media education strategies and programs.
With that, David Buckingham was saying last time that journalists may not perceive themselves as media educators when going in the classroom, but they should promote their actions as media education. Is that...
It's correct. I mean, of course, well, with some nuances, we say that in English?
Yes.
Avec des nuances. I mean, sometimes I think Lie Detector is a good example. You prepare a process that you train journalists to implement a process into the classroom. So it's not completely absurd. It's useful in some context, but the purpose, and that's why we are more in line with the Journalistes en classe process, is that the demand is very different, and so we have to propose solutions that are adapted to the needs. So yes, I agree with the bad situation for a journalist is to come into a classroom saying I'm now the teacher. So it is not his profession, and we don't ask a professional journalist to be in the classroom to position himself as a teacher, because the teacher will stay after the journalist and was there before the journalist came in. So it's important to stay in his position.
Right. we can see a lot of news organizations trying to go into the classroom with the journalists. And last time we were talking that very often what happens is that the journalists going in the classroom from so on behalf of these news organizations, they use this us and them discourse, with which they criticize the bad people doing bad things on social media, and you know, talking in this black and white terms, saying we are the good ones, they are the bad ones. And we know that this is not a very good approach in terms of media education, in terms of learning media, teaching media literacy, because the whole media experience is much more complex than that. We cannot, we as media educators avoid teaching in black and white terms. So for us, it's a lot of negotiation of terms, it's a lot of self-reflection and reflection and analysis of the media representations and practices. Juliane, you heard Patrick. Do you agree with him?
Yes, I do. And I think that journalists can do some wonderful work in the classroom, and they can really switch on a light that might not have been on before they walked into the classroom.
Right.
But there's only so many journalists in the world, and journalists also have a job to do, which is journalism.
Exactly.
And so I really think that I know that there's more and more talk about, you know, the vocational quality of journalistic skills being embedded via external experts in schools at younger and younger ages. But we can't do it without the teachers, and we've got to listen very carefully, and we ask the teachers very much, what is it that the teachers need to take this up? You know, we ask them. We have very interesting statistics which we just published on the OECD forum recently, which show that almost 100% of teachers say, yes, this is an important subject for my classroom. I want my children in my classroom to learn about basic source checking. This is relevant in the maths lesson as much as it is in the history lesson and in the biology lesson and in the primary school lesson, right? They say, yes, this is important. I want them to learn this. All the various, we ask quite a lot of questions about what they think is important. And throughout they say this is important. When we then say to the same teachers, have you broached this subject in the classroom yourself? It's a very different story. And we only, you know, there's a massive gap. And that gap of interest and inaction, you know, the gap between interest and action, that's what we've got to really fill now. And that's why I'm really pleased. So we were recently involved in an expert group for the European Commission, which was thinking about how to embed digital literacy training in education and training for teachers. And we came up with guidelines on how teachers can practically do it themselves, because we've got to get there. The reason, you know, from our point of view, and, you know, other organizations might disagree, and perhaps there is a long-term and, you know, forever element to this, but, you know, as far as we're concerned, is we're filling a gap at the moment, and it is an urgent gap. We can't wait for the teachers to become trained and confident. They say they don't have time to get trained. They say they're not being rewarded when they do find out about these things, and they also tell us quite often they don't quite dare talk about it because they don't understand it half the time. It's moving so fast.
Confidence is the key word here, and I know from my own experience that it's very difficult for teachers. A guideline won't do the trick, because the confidence, it's earned. It's earned through practice and exercise and training. And unfortunately, we do not have enough support, financial support. I'm talking about official support and so on, private support, to teach, train the teachers, teach media education, because this is something that they perceive as not being able to sort of debate with their students about these issues that are very much present in the students' daily life, and they feel a bit overwhelmed with the discussions. A lot of controversial issues appear in the teaching, in the discussion with the students, and that takes some, you know, some knowledge, some ability, some skills. Have you had these situations with controversial issues that appeared in the classroom and how did you deal with them, or the journalists present there? Yeah, maybe Gilles, because and then
je vais répondre, mais de manière assez théorique, c'est-à-dire que, oui, certainement qu'il y a eu des conflits et certainement qu'on a trouvé des manières de les résoudre. Mais en fait, je voulais revenir aussi sur le rôle du journaliste et sa capacité à éduquer aux médias. C'est-à-dire que les médias, c'est bien plus large que les médias d'information.
Oui.
Tout le monde est un média maintenant. Je ne le suis plus trop parce que je suis plus sur les réseaux sociaux, mais voilà, tout le monde s'exprime, tout le monde a quelque chose à dire. Le journaliste a la caractéristique d'être un professionnel des médias. Et donc, il est en mesure d'expliquer comment se forme l'information, en tout cas l'information journalistique. Comment on passe d'une information, un fait, une déclaration, à une information journalistique, c'est-à-dire traiter journalistiquement.
Oui.
Traiter journalistiquement, c'est recadrer, c'est-à-dire dire qu'est-ce qui s'est passé avant, qu'est-ce qui se passe maintenant, et ouvrir sur ce que ça peut amener. Et en fait, expliquer ça aux jeunes, voilà, commençant à 10 ans, c'est un grand intérêt. Pourquoi ? Parce que c'est un traitement qu'eux-mêmes peuvent utiliser pour évaluer le reste des médias auxquels ils sont soumis. C'est-à-dire, je vois qui parle, j'essaye de comprendre pourquoi il parle, j'essaye de comprendre s'il y a un but ou s'il n'y a pas de but. Alors, il y a souvent un but. Et donc, de cette manière-là, en expliquant aux enfants comment un journaliste travaille, il remplit un rôle d'éducation aux médias. Mais il ne peut évidemment pas assumer tous les rôles. Et pour revenir à ta question sur le règlement du conflit, en fait, ça dépend aussi des journalistes, parce que des gens sont capables de régler ce genre de situation, et d'autres pas. Et c'est pour ça que quand je disais parfois le professeur s'enfuit, en fait, c'est un peu laisser la personne dans une situation qui n'est pas nécessairement celle qu'elle connaît. Comme disait Juliana, ils savent faire du journalisme, ils ne savent pas nécessairement gérer une classe, et pire, gérer des conflits dans une classe.
I'll just say something very briefly about that. So we actually instruct our journalists to leave the classroom. If a teacher leaves the classroom, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's the one thing that we ask of the teachers. We come in, we prepare everything. We give them materials to work with beforehand so that they get warmed up, so that they've already done a few examples and have read about it and have talked about it in the classroom. But we really need the teacher in the classroom because we want them to hear it. Our official audience are the children, but unofficially and informally and crucially, it is the teacher that we're trying to reach. This is not quite as scary as you think. You do not have to have all of the answers to talk about this. And in fact, showing that you don't know, and showing that you don't have the answers is actually incredibly important at this moment when there's so much information out there and we're being asked to make decisions and have answers immediately. And we opt for the easy answers that are often less nuanced than reality actually is. And so what the journalists are really showing is how to talk about conspiracy theories, for instance. You don't say, no, that's ridiculous, that's wrong. But instead, they're supposed to say, and we train them, when they get something, and we do get questions like, is it true that if I wear a mask, I'm going to get COVID or something, right? That the journalist doesn't say, no, that's not true. But instead that the journalist says, well, if I were a journalist, and I am a journalist, here's how I deal with that.
Great, So could you sketch for us a little bit what the training entails for the journalists working with lie detectors?
For the journalists?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So first of all, we select them quite carefully. We're quite strict. They can't also be freelancing, like writing political speeches or working for some company at the side. We know that it's difficult to be a journalist without freelancing on the side and but we only take pure journalists. And then we also make sure that they are willing to talk about their own fallibility as a journalist, because they've got to do that. They have to be willing to talk about the weaknesses in the journalistic system, which we all know in this room. I think most people understand that there's a problem with journalism: too little time, too little money, sophisticated PR machines, etc., etc. Not to mention the fake news that's out there that actually can also be very difficult for journalists to untangle. So we train them for a full day, and we currently train them in 2 formats. The first format is our traditional format, which is to walk in and how to talk to the 10 and 11-year-olds and how to talk to the 14 and 15-year-olds, because it's quite different, how to use different examples, you know, how to, and they're often not quite used to talking about their fallibility and their problems, so they have to practice that.
Are you looking also at other media than the information media, or only information media, journalistic content?
So we have all sorts. So we have a few retired journalists who are absolutely amazing. You know, we've trained more than 300, you know, and some of them are now, you know, lawyers at RGP, for instance. But we have radio journalists, we have, you know, people who develop fact-checking tools and apps. We call them experts. We don't necessarily, you know, these are media experts that come into classrooms, but they have to comply with several criteria.
Right. Thank you. Patrick, David again was saying last time that he agrees that journalists should be part of media education. It's a very good idea, but it depends on what terms. And he was referring to the fact that most journalists coming from on behalf of news organizations, for instance, which is not your case necessarily, are going in the classroom and are seeing this action more of a kind of a public relations or audience building activity, which he feels can undermine the media education process. What do you think?
I'm okay with that, of course. No, I mean, we know that, yes, two things to say. Several years ago, when you launch media literacy projects around information, we were being asked to be critical about the mainstream media, the journalism work, because they made mistakes, they are stereotyping the society, etc. That was the thematic that appears 20 years ago about journalism in media literacy processes. Nowadays, let's say more often, what we are, as media education institution, we are asked to invite journalism to make possible that young people trust again the journalist. It's not the same position. Be critical about the work of journalism, and today we have to be confident. And so that's one track. I think that is quite difficult to manage, because still we have to admit that even as professional a journalist is embedded in an economical context with pressure, with difficulty to investigate information, with errors that can occur. It's not disinformation, it's the reality of a work that is nowadays particularly heavy again. So that's a component. The second component is the marketing issue. We solved that 20 years ago with the Journalists Union here in Belgium, inviting the Journalists Union to be the intermediate between the newspapers, the brands, and the classroom, or even the youth organization, because I think you have to know that journalism in classroom goes far somewhere else than in the classroom. It's also youth organization, youth centers, etc. So the intermediate of Journalist Union makes a distance with the media that is quite valuable. People cannot ask, probably teachers ask, I want someone from Le Soir or from the RTBF, but I mean the moderation of the Journalist Union and what we expect from them is not to be instrumentalized for marketing purpose. Even if we know that when a journalist comes into a classroom, he is not coming from nowhere. I mean, he's working for a media and he can explain it, etc. But it's not the same position. That's how we try to solve this kind of dilemma between marketing issue and education.
So, Gilles, do you have does AGP have a second agenda to sort of promote trust in journalism?
Alors oui. Oui, parce que voilà, on a envie que les gens aient confiance en ces médias-là. C'est ce que j'expliquais sur la manière dont ça se fait. En fait, une information, tout n'est pas une information au sens journalistique, et donc la manière dont ça se compose, y compris en prenant les inconvénients, le contexte économique et ce contexte d'autopromo qui existe, en fait, on a quand même envie d'expliquer que si on respecte toutes ces règles-là, on obtient de la bonne information. C'est pas uniquement dans un média labellisé, voilà, le soir ou la RTBF comme tu en parles, qu'on va avoir des bonnes informations et ailleurs pas. En fait, ce qu'on essaie d'expliquer, c'est que le processus de confection de cette information doit être respecté et que dans ce cas-là, on obtient de l'information de qualité. Et je reviens un tout petit peu avec un peu de la promotion de ce qu'on fait. Donc on a réalisé une vidéo qui explique ce trajet de l'information et qui prend en compte le contexte dans lequel on fait. Comme dit Patrick, en fait, on ne tombe pas du ciel en étant journaliste. Voilà, on est dans tout un contexte. Mais la manière dont on travaille est ce qui est le garant de ce bon travail de journaliste dans lequel on peut avoir confiance.
Several thoughts were going through my head, and
Okay.
I will give the floor to our audience to ask the questions. But first, I just wanted to pinpoint the fact that in media education, how we identify trust is a very important issue, because it's a very fine line in between skepticism and cynicism. Media educators have this issue all the time. If our students become cynical about journalism and different news organizations saying they are not good, they are good, they are not good, this is not a good learning procedure, so to speak. So trust is important. If there are any questions, I see 1, 2, 3, great. If you could introduce yourself a little bit before. Yes. Thank you.
Je vais parler en français. C'est possible?
Oui, c'est possible.
Alors ma question, donc je m'appelle Pauline Debris, je suis étudiante à l'IEX en journalisme. Et ma question va plus vers la Belgique, parce que je connais mieux. C'est par rapport aux écoles dans lesquelles vous faites ce genre d'intervention. Je trouve ça extrêmement important que ce soit dans des écoles aussi très diversifiées, et je ne sais pas si vous le faites. Parce que moi, quand j'imagine l'éducation aux médias, j'ai eu la chance d'aller dans des écoles dans le Brabant wallon, dans des internats, etc. Et souvent, il faut un petit peu d'argent pour aller dans un internat. Et donc, on a eu l'éducation aux médias. Mais est-ce que vous faites ça dans des écoles beaucoup plus défavorisées, enfin, avec un public, en tout cas, qui est beaucoup plus défavorisé? Donc,
oui, je peux répondre à la fois pour journalistes en classe et pour Lie Detectors. Je vais pas citer d'endroits particulièrement. Enfin, pour journalistes en classe, je peux dire qu'on va partout en Wallonie et à Bruxelles, partout. Pour Lie Detectors, je ne vais pas citer d'endroits parce que j'ai pas envie d'associer des endroits à du moins bien éduqué ou défavorisé, etc. Mais j'y suis personnellement allé dans ce genre de quartier pour Lie Detectors. Donc je peux vous dire que les deux vont partout.
It's a very good question. Thank you very much. The lady asked whether you are envisaging a diversity of schools that includes also disadvantaged communities.
Yes, thank you so much for asking that. So we, I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to answer this question because it's so important. So wherever we go, when we start in a new region, we start with a map of all of the schools, and we make sure that we have representation from all types of schools, right? Because the ones that ask us proactively may be the ones that are just used to this sort of thing and providing this. But there are many schools where teachers just don't even think that somebody might come and visit, and they don't, they're not as proactive. So we make sure that we represent all schools. We don't exclude elite schools, by the way, because we don't think that anybody is invulnerable to this, right? And the other thing,
but the perception may differ very much, and the perceptions about disinformation, for instance, may differ very much. I will.
Yes, that's also true, and we find that. So nobody's done it. I'd love to see a scientific study that shows that the difference scientifically that we have noticed anecdotally, and it is that in the more remote and the more rural areas that are already a little bit of a geographical silo between them, where assumptions are not tested on a day-by-day basis via a diverse environment, there is a higher vulnerability. So how do you get a journalist out there in the morning so that that journalist can then be back home again, or not home, I'm sorry, they do almost live in the newsroom, so that they can get back to the newsroom in time for the morning conference, which is what we try to do. That's impossible, right? So it's a problem for this kind of work. And it is why we have trained our journalists, and I neglected to mention this separately. When we train them, we don't only train them to walk into a classroom, we also train them as like mini YouTubers. It's very difficult. We train them how to do this by screen. And we're right now in the process, and I think it's a really important one for Europe, as we're trying to find European solutions that are good for Wallonie, that are good for the Ardennes, that are good for, you know, the mountains of, I don't know where, you know, Croatia. How good is media literacy training of our sort digitally versus in person? See what I mean? Is there a difference when somebody walks into the classroom versus when a journalist comes in on screen and does it via screen? And that's something that we really want to know, because if the digital version is as good as we hope it is, then we should be going exactly to those regions. Those are probably the most important ones.
Thank you.
Je vais switcher en français pour répondre, mais très courtement, très rapidement. Il faut faire attention aux stéréotypes, en disant c'est pas parce qu'on est dans un milieu multiculturel, dans des milieux dits défavorisés, ça ne veut pas dire grand-chose d'ailleurs, qu'il n'y a pas d'intérêt pour l'éducation. Mais il y a bien au contraire. Moi, je peux témoigner en tant qu'autorité publique en éducation aux médias. On vient de lancer un appel à projets scolaires et non scolaires en éducation aux médias. Et souvent, les projets les plus innovants, les plus engagés, viennent de quartiers dits difficiles. Donc voilà, il ne faut pas trop stéréotyper les situations. Tous les jeunes de Molenbeek ne sont pas des jeunes radicalisés, complètement embrigadés dans des théories du complot ou de conspirationnisme. Enfin, j'enfonce des portes ouvertes, hein, mais je crois qu'il faut sans cesse s'éviter de penser comme ça de manière stéréotypée sur les publics et les contextes. Donc voilà, mais ce n'était pas ce que tu voulais dire, ça j'en suis. Voilà, on est bien d'accord.
Merci. C'était Madame là-bas. Quelqu'un?
Ça marche. Vous m'entendez? Oui.
Ah oui.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. J'ai pas vraiment de questions, j'aimerais simplement partager un retour d'expérience. Alors je vais vous dire d'où je parle. I am not a pure journalist, même si j'ai commencé le journalisme à l'âge de 15 ans, donc bien avant de faire des études. Et même si aujourd'hui, pour vivre, je suis freelance, je fais aussi de l'accompagnement éditorial pour des artistes, des structures culturelles, des projets sociaux, artistiques. Et depuis un an, je fais notamment des résidences, donc en immersion, en éducation aux médias et à l'information, sur des territoires dits prioritaires qui sont ruraux en France. Donc, j'aimerais vous faire un retour d'expérience. Déjà, je suis très contente que cette table ronde soit organisée, que ce sujet soit au cœur des assises, parce que tout comme Juliane, je suis tout à fait d'accord pour dire que c'est urgent d'agir. Je l'ai vu là vraiment sur le terrain, en contact des publics. Donc moi, j'ai travaillé avec des gens âgés de 7 à 75 ans. Donc déjà, je voudrais dire que le rôle des journalistes dans l'éducation et l'information aux médias ne se résume pas uniquement aux enfants, même si les enfants, bien sûr, sont les premiers curieux, réceptifs et porteurs d'avenir. Donc c'est vraiment important de travailler avec les enfants. Mais il y a aussi du travail à faire avec les adultes. Quand vous parlez avec une dame qui n'a jamais travaillé, qui n'a jamais fait d'études, qui a 50 ans, qui a 2 enfants, des petits-enfants, qui véhicule une image des médias, des idées, et en fait qui ne connaît absolument rien des médias et de l'information. Voilà, il y a aussi des publics adultes à aller chercher. Les adultes ont aussi besoin d'évoluer, en fait. Il n'y a pas que les enfants. Donc je voulais juste préciser ce petit point. Et Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec tout ce que vous avez dit concernant le rôle du journaliste qui devient presque enseignant dans la classe. Moi, en l'occurrence, j'ai connu que des cas où j'étais seule avec mes publics, que ce soit des élèves ou des adultes. Des adultes, par exemple, que j'avais surnommé les dames couture, parce que c'était des publics non captifs. Elles venaient à la base pour suivre des ateliers couture. Donc, essayer de faire du décryptage média, voire de la pratique journalistique avec ces personnes, c'est pas évident. Et vraiment, moi, je me suis sentie très, très seule, mais j'ai pris très à cœur tous ces projets, tous ces résidences qui sont financées par le ministère de la Culture français. Et donc, pour mon retour d'expérience, j'aimerais dire que vraiment, il y a une grande urgence à investir massivement dans l'éducation à l'information aux médias. C'est très, très problématique. Et je pense que alors bien sûr, il y a le volet théorique qui est hyper important, sensibiliser notamment pas seulement à l'histoire de la fake news, parce que ça, il y a déjà beaucoup d'enseignants qui le traitent, et c'est assez binaire en fait, fake news, right news, mais il y a aussi en fait la question de faire la différence entre un fait vérifiable, une information et une opinion, et une ligne éditoriale. Donc moi je travaille aussi beaucoup là-dessus, donc sur la partie théorique, savoir aussi avoir des clés d'analyse, de compréhension quand on regarde les actualités ou quand on voit une information passer sur un réseau social. Quelles clés on a, quels outils on a pour analyser en fait ce qu'on nous présente. Et donc sur la partie pratique, moi j'ai travaillé à la fois la photo, l'écriture, le dessin, même la vidéo et l'audio avec les publics avec qui j'ai travaillé. Et je remarque néanmoins que pour les publics qui sont le plus éloignés des enjeux et de la compréhension des médias et de l'information, la vidéo reste un support, un outil à privilégier, parce que déjà ça permet tout de suite d'embarquer les gens. Ça permet aussi qu'ils se sentent mieux représentés. Quand je dis eux, c'est pas forcément les publics eux-mêmes, mais c'est aussi leur environnement, leur monde direct. Parce que moi, à chaque fois, j'ai travaillé sur l'information vraiment locale, sur les territoires. Et voilà, et je pense j'espère qu'aujourd'hui, c'est aussi l'occasion peut-être d'envisager des assises de l'EMI, tout simplement. Parce que c'est un sujet énorme. Alors bien sûr, tous les sujets qui sont traités dans les tables rondes de ces assises mériteraient leurs propres assises, mais l'EMI, je pense vraiment que c'est crucial. Je le redis, je l'ai dit à une conférence précédente, il y a 58% des Français qui ont une défiance vis-à-vis des médias, et sur les territoires sur lesquels je suis intervenue, on n'est plus à 58%, là je pense qu'on est à 98%. Les gens avec qui j'ai travaillé, les adultes notamment, ne consultent ni la presse écrite, ils ne connaissent pas les grands journaux tels que Le Monde, Le Figaro, etc. Ils ne consultent même plus la télévision, ou exceptionnellement le JT d'M6. Donc on a travaillé aussi sur des analyses comparatives.
This is very interesting to find out why all these things happen. I wouldn't link the need for media literacy education only to a problematic, to some problematic issues we have in public communication, in mediated communication. I think it's high time we have media literacy and digital literacy embedded in our formal education since kindergarten, because it's, as I was saying before at the beginning of this debate, it's a cultural competence, it's a life competence. Our life is immersed in media and different media content, so we need to learn how to ask questions, to reflect about our emotions and how we interact with the media and so on. So disinformation and all the things that come with communication, mediated communication, are embedded in all this educational process. Would you like to comment on what was said?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the testimonial, and of course we were speaking about school system, but indeed there is an urgent need to develop media literacy and media information literacy in other contexts, and we have projects like that on alphabetisation, so literacy, people that have disabilities regarding reading and writing. Yeah, we say that in English. For example, youth organization, of course, elderly people. Just a remark for the idea. I catch the idea of organizing European symposium for media literacy. Let's start. I think it's. I speak with under control of Jérôme and his team from Journalisme Citoyenneté. the idea of the actual conference is to develop a specific topic regarding literacy. That's the case in the international ACIS in Tours since years and years. And I think the idea is to develop this also embedded with all the thematic that are present in actually. So let's start with, it's a starting point. Today, I think the intention of Journalisme C20 and the partners is to develop other initiatives in the next...
I really get very frustrated when I hear starting point after 20 years working in the field, really. But that's the case, unfortunately. Juliana.
I'll say something very briefly about the comment about age. I agree absolutely that adults need this as well. That's why the contact with the teachers is so important. And it's very often the teachers who later on, after the session, say, yeah, but you only really print what the government tells you to print, don't you? And those are the conversations that we need to be having, right? And there's some very interesting projects happening in Germany at the moment with people living in senior citizen residences, so retired people living in an enclosed space. It's much easier to monitor progress when you have people that you can keep coming back to. And so, we don't have the capacity to do it, but I really hope that somebody's going to come up with a good solution soon. And also, I just want to make a comment. In this room, we're talking about media literacy and the role of journalism. But there's also, digital literacy is a vast topic, and we have got to be looking at it from different viewpoints. We don't only need to be telling the children how to deal with content they find online, but they also need to understand how the content reaches them. There's cognitive psychology that shows that if a child understands, or if anybody understands why content is reaching them, why they have been targeted with a particular type of content, and now we're talking about preference settings and algorithms, etc., they are more able to withstand it and be resilient against it when they know why they're getting it. And this is a plug, actually, for the next panel, because there's a brilliant panel happening on algorithm literacy. I really recommend that you go and see it. I'm moderating it. I wasn't supposed to. You don't see me on the program.
Audience building and PR. Gilles, would you like to add something?
Oui, aussi très rapidement, en fait, ce que ton expérience met en lumière, c'est la nécessité de construire ou reconstruire la confiance. Et c'est pour ça que je trouve que d'une certaine manière, ces expériences-là et les nôtres ici, elles sont indispensables, parce que la confiance, ça commence par connaître la personne, ou ici en l'occurrence on parle des journalistes, et de comprendre comment ça fonctionne. Ça, je ne vais pas dire que ça déconstruit nécessairement les images qu'on peut en avoir, mais c'est comme ça qu'on commence. Je veux dire, on peut se retrouver face à des gens qui disent les médias, comme si tout était qu'un seul bloc avec les médias ou les journalistes, comme on peut parler de n'importe quelle catégorie sociale ou type de gens en disant ils sont comme ça. Mais la réalité, c'est que c'est toujours distinct de cette uniformité. Et c'est pour ça qu'il faut continuer à y aller. C'est difficile. J'étais journaliste quand j'y allais, et on entend des choses qui ne sont pas faciles à entendre, et on entend des choses qui sont parfois vraies, et pas nécessairement dans le complotisme ou le fait qu'en fait on trafique les informations. Mais il arrive qu'effectivement on se trompe. Mais la capacité, par exemple, à admettre qu'il existe des erreurs, que tout n'est pas parfait, qu'on travaille pour, qu'on tend vers la vérité et qu'il n'y a pas une vérité, en fait, c'est des choses que, je ne vais pas dire que ces gens-là attendent d'entendre, mais ils ont l'impression que tout est toujours monolithique en face. Et ça dépend aussi du type de médias auquel on est confronté. Quand on regarde, parce qu'on parlait du JT d'M6, ça peut être n'importe quel JT, je veux dire, c'est quelque chose qui est très très formaté, il n'y a aucune interaction, et il y a peu de suivi. C'est rare qu'un JT, alors évidemment il y a des thèmes qui passent de JT en JT ou de journaux en journaux, mais je veux dire, l'approfondissement de la question, et là intervient un peu plus l'éducateur aux médias ou le professeur, aller chercher, se renseigner, aller chercher autre chose, avoir un autre point de vue, c'est important, mais commencer par rencontrer les gens qui font quelque part ce qu'on conteste, je crois que c'est un bon point de départ. Voilà.
Oui, je veux bien, pardon, Jérôme Bouvier, président de Journalistes Professionnels, l'intervention de notre consoeur me fait pousser à donner deux précisions. d'une part par rapport à cette ambition et ô combien légitime qu'il y ait des assises de l'EMI, et je pense que s'il y en a, ça sera très bien, mais elles sont au cœur des assises du journalisme depuis le premier jour en 2007, quand on les a créées à Lille, et la preuve, c'est aux assises qu'est née l'idée de la création des résidences pour les journalistes dans les quartiers dits politiques de la ville en France, dans les quartiers en gros défavorisés, parce que c'est une idée que nous avions soumise au débat lors des assises de Poitiers il y a plus de 10 ans. La chance a voulu que ce dossier puisse être porté au niveau du ministère de la Culture, et Fleur Pellerin donc a débloqué des crédits pour que ça puisse être possible. Si je l'évoque, c'est parce que je crois que c'est unique en Europe, je ne crois pas qu'il y ait d'équivalent. C'est sur le modèle des artistes en résidence, qui sont dans des établissements scolaires et qui viennent travailler avec des publics locaux. Et je pense que ça pourrait être mis en exergue pour que d'autres pays, peut-être de l'Union européenne, s'en saisissent. Il s'agit assez simplement de dire, voilà, sur un projet qui est défini localement, avec les collectivités, avec un collège, avec un lycée, avec un hôpital, avec une prison, parce que l'éducation aux médias, ça n'est pas qu'à l'école, c'est tout au long de la vie, et bien qu'un journaliste puisse s'insérer sur un projet au long cours et vienne travailler avec ces publics. Le mieux étant qu'ils ne viennent pas professer le catéchisme, mais qu'ils viennent fabriquer de l'information avec les acteurs locaux. Je crois qu'il n'y a pas meilleure éducation aux médias que de fabriquer ensemble un média, que de fabriquer ensemble une radio, une télé, un support, et que c'est là où je pense les journalistes professionnels peuvent être les plus utiles. Donc, dire que j'aimerais, moi, que cette idée de résidence qui est née aux assises et que cette consoeur est en train d'expérimenter, et je m'en réjouis, puisse se développer dans d'autres pays et que ça crée des liens et des réseaux intéressants. Et après, dire aussi, juste d'un mot, on a créé le site en francemédiaéducation.fr pour l'espace francophone, que je vous invite à consulter. Il y a besoin aussi de valoriser des expériences très très diverses. On a créé 6 prix éducation aux médias aux assises en France depuis maintenant une dizaine d'années, justement parce qu'il y a une telle multitude d'initiatives que certaines auraient besoin de se syndiquer, d'autres de tirer parti de ce qui a été fait ailleurs et des échecs qui ont été. Et donc on a essayé de créer ces prix pour qu'il y ait une véritable dynamique qui se crée autour de ces micro-initiatives, et qu'on puisse développer ça au niveau européen me paraîtrait également intéressant. Et puis dernier point, mais j'y insiste beaucoup, je pense qu'on est trop enfermé encore dans l'éducation aux médias globalement entre le milieu scolaire et les journalistes et les enseignants. Et que ce tripode-là, je pense qu'il faut qu'on le fasse un peu exploser. On a un slogan assez facile, mais de dire l'EMI, c'est tout au long de la vie. On peut, à 70 ans, colporter autant de fake news qu'à 15 ans. À l'université, en France, il n'y a plus d'EMI, comme si l'affaire était close, comme si après le bac, on n'a plus besoin. Il y a besoin d'être dans les bibliothèques, il y a besoin d'être dans les médiathèques, il y a besoin d'être partout où les citoyens se forgent leur identité.
Parfaitement d'accord. Merci beaucoup. I know there was two questions very, very briefly, because we were told we have to get out of here.
I think I have the mic. I am on the other side. Miss, on the other side here. Do you want me to stand?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Sorry.
But it was somebody over there that was waiting for a long time.
I was the first. I promise I was the first to raise my hand.
Yes, I know. I've seen the yes. And then, yeah.
Thank you. I'll be very brief.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Bayan Tel from Jordan, and I really want to thank you for moderating this amazing session, because I lead a team of experts in Jordan on how to integrate media and information literacy into schools from grades KG2 to 12. And we've been debating all these questions that you raised, and all the discussion that took place right now was actually taking place in Jordan.
So next time we go to Jordan and exchange experience.
So I just want to say that at the end, we decided that, yes, journalists are great to start with as trainers, but they are not teachers, and they can never be teachers. So I agree with your speakers. Juliane, it's great to see you here, and we go back a long way. We also felt that since the government is actually supporting integrating it, we were debating whether to include it as, or include these skills and competencies as units in books across the spectrum, or we integrate it across all subjects. And we decided integrating it would be a much better option for one reason, and that is if you include it as a unit, it becomes a subject and it becomes just as boring and as didactic as any other way of teaching now, because we are reinventing education in Jordan, and this is a major step. So it is very interactive. And it can be updated, like you said. It's lifelong. And depending on the challenges and the things we see online. So basically, arming these young students with the skills will help them overcome whatever comes their way, because false information, conspiracy theories continue to evolve, continue to come, and so it's the only way.
This information has been there since Athens, no?
Yes.
Since antique Greek, how do you say?
Yeah.
Grecia Antica.
The birth of Christ. No,
Thank you. Which was a fake news. Sorry.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much for this panel, which was very interesting. I'm Quentin Arias. I'm the editor-in-chief of Babel International, which is the publisher of Café Babel, so a participative magazine, and also the coordinator of the Sfera Network, which is like a consortium of European media working on how to deliver cross-border issues to young people, so Gen Z and millennials. My question is about more... it's a bit of a weird question which can bounce back to the others, but I did some I went to some high schools and to some middle schools in France and Belgium just after the Paris and Brussels attack, and it was very fascinating to see like how it was very challenging for us journalists to tackle conspiracy theories. And I was wondering, from your point of view, and I don't know if it is okay for the master's program you are launching, like also how you training the reporters to work also with psychologists or social health workers in this regard, because like for example, like since it was a long time ago, I had the chance actually to go back and to meet the students. Actually, I gave more or less a lecture or training, and some of them told me also like they were believing in conspiracy theory because they were resisting authority. And as a journalist, as an adult, even if I was 25, I was already seen as an authority. So I was wondering, from your point of view, are you facing those kind of issues? How do you tackle it? And how do you train people to do, journalists or elsewhere, to do that? Thanks.
If you're training.
Okay, so this is one of the harder topics that we cover, and we do two things. First of all, we limit the expectation because it is such a big topic. Conspiracy theories is such a big topic, and it is so risky. You only have to look at what happened to the teacher in Paris who brought up Charlie Hebdo, right? So we've got to make sure that the teacher is safe. The journalist pops into the classroom for 90 minutes, does something exciting, walks out again. The teacher can't be left with a big problem. So we've got to be really careful. What we tell it's a very long conversation, and we can have it separately later on, but what we tell the journalists is two things. First of all, reduce the expectation of the class to tackle it completely within 90 minutes. But also say, here's how I would deal when if I saw something that looked like a little bit like a conspiracy theory to me, I would check this, I would check this, I would check this. Did you check that? Did you check that? Maybe let's look at it together. And sometimes really interesting conversations happen where we can actually untangle something, a chain letter, or one of those like Momo or the blue whatever. Sometimes really interesting interactive things happen in the classroom. But also, then we encourage the journalists sometimes to also step back and go, how do you recognize a conspiracy theory? These are the traits of a conspiracy. And we train them quite specifically. We take quite some time. And I recommend that you read the Conspiracy Theory Handbook by a brilliant researcher called Stephen Lewandowski. It is in many languages. It is beautifully written. And he acknowledges that more cognitive psychological research needs to be done about conspiracy theories. But start there and read something on that.
Thank you very much. We are pressured to, we can take one last very quick question. Very quick, and then we can leave. No? Okay, we talk with you during the break. Thank you sorry, I wish we could have been here more time. Thank you very much. Juliana, you have to go to your session, so we have to wrap up. Thank you very much for your participation. One thing that remained with me was what you, Juliana, said. We can't do it without the teachers. So I think that could be one main conclusion that we have to take home with us. Thank you very much.
And I would especially thank for you, Nicoleta, to come to us from Romania. Just you didn't explain a bit, but the situation in Romania is not very brilliant in terms of media literacy. I know that you are looking for support because political authorities are not supporting that much media literacy. So it's just a short political message, because the reality of Europe is that also, even if we have big discourse at EU level, in some countries it's still very, very difficult on grassroots to deliver media and information literacy. Thank you so much to be with us.